and then all of a sudden you hit the ball. The ball's actually going to push the club back down. It's only like 500 microseconds of contact, but it's enough force to kind of whoop back. And the thing for Viktor that really resonated was his coach, Joe Mayo, was like, let's try and steepen your angle of attack.
Yep. All right, Erik, so we're in the focal room. This is where you guys did the wedge study? Okay, tell us a little about like what did you do?
Yeah, so this is our motion capture system. So you can see we have some markers on this wedge, and that allows us to track how the club's moving through your swing, how it's bending, all its orientations. And we did this big wedge study where we had over 100 people come through and hit 15-yard chips, 30-yard chips, 60-yard chips. We had some really interesting insights on particularly angle of attack.
Yep.
And so, yeah, looking forward to seeing what your data looks like and see what we find and how that matches up to what we found in the study.
Oh, there it is. So let's add some data to your data set. You might throw this away after I leave, but we're going to hit a shot. And I think for me, it's like I've never really, I feel like, had a good enough understanding of grind. So like I want to answer some of those questions here. And then also, I'm just curious on, how far can I, where am I hitting the ground, the ball?
Yeah, well, let's do it.
What do we got? What should I hit? Like a 30-yard shot or how?
Target is at 15 right now.
15.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a little 15-yarder. That was chunky for demonstration purposes, Erik. That was.
There's 16 yards though.
Hey.
Distance
control.
That's what matters. We can kind of see here up on the TV. He's got a representation of the ball and the club face.
Okay.
Where that ball's touching the club face, kind of at first kiss.
Okay.
We then back out from that. What was happening before we got to that point?
Yep. Okay. Well, let's see what happened with that shot that I just hit with my attack angle here.
Yeah. So Zach is running through. We have a chart here. So this is just time on that x-axis, and then here's the angle of attack. And so you can kind of see you're coming into impact here, and you can see the club motion. And at some point, we get this kind of big, rapid change in that angle of attack. And so naturally, just on an arc, right? If there's no ball and no ground, you're going to start moving down, and eventually you're going to move up.
Yep.
What really stands out to us with like a little 15-yard is where we see this rapid change. And so this is going to be probably where the ground started pushing the club up.
Got
So
it.
you said, hey, for demonstration purposes, hit a little behind the ball. And so you see this rapid rise in that angle of attack, and then you're probably like, what in the world happened?
Yep.
There's this like spike there. Well, that's where you actually hit the ball. So if you can imagine, you got two different forces acting on the club. Initially, you got a force of the ground kind of pushing up on the grind, which is why grind's really important. And then all of a sudden you hit the ball. The ball's actually going to push the club back down, like it's only like 500 microseconds of contact, but it's enough force to kind of whoop, bump it down a little bit before you exit, and then your angle of attack keeps going positive as you finish the chip. So that's a really cool piece of data we get out of the system that we don't necessarily get out of the single number that you're maybe used to seeing when you report an angle of attack for a given shot. Angle of attack that's positive with the driver is moving up into impact, and negative is kind of moving down into impact, and that can influence spin and launch angle. With a wedge, majority of the time, if you're on a launch monitor, you're going to see a negative number, which means you're descending into the ball. And for us, what we're looking at is like, okay, we now have this good high resolution point of where we're touching the ball. What's happening before that? We know we can get some ground contact, and that angle of attack, whether that club is moving down or up, can be kind of changing pretty rapidly if you get a lot of contact with the ground. And so that's really what we were looking at primarily with that big study.
Let's see, because we're looking at attack angle at the ground. I want to see some of these other numbers that we're capturing here too.
Yeah, so
there's your attack angle at the ground.
Okay.
On the left.
So at first touch, right? So this is what you're doing. Right? Like what was really interesting with all the players we had come through here is there wasn't a big difference in that number for the different skill levels, and it was typically always down, right? That number itself, like how descending it was actually pretty consistent. So what people do with their swing, it's not totally different than like what a tour player does.
Okay.
Right? So you're 13 down. If I had you hit 10 shots in here, you're probably going to be 13 down most of the time when you touch the ground.
Right. Okay.
But the important thing is what the ball sees,
Okay.
which you hit a little fat. By the time you got to the ball, you're actually moving up 7,
That's crazy.
right? That's a huge change.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that's really going to separate the best players in the world is that, like, they're typically, unless they're meaning to, they're hitting pretty close to the ball, right? Maybe a little bit of ground contact. Like with that test we ran, like 86% of the shots had some sort of ground interaction before they got to the ball,
Yeah.
right? So that leaves a very, a little over 10%. They're actually just fully clean, just ball contact first.
Yeah.
And what Zach just pulled up here was how far behind the ball you hit.
I did good on that one. Let's just show that I hit 2.8 inches behind the ball. That's impressive.
It's
really good.
It's a bold approach. And so that's why there's a whole over 2.5 inches
Right.
for the ground to push your club up before it got to the ball.
Right.
And so that might be good if you're trying to like bounce it up and create like a high trajectory. That's what Phil Mickelson talks about, using that to his advantage
Yeah.
when he hits that shot. But for just a stock chip, maybe not the most sustainable approach.
Do you want to look at any of the ball data on that shot?
Sure.
Yeah, we can pull that up. Here we are. We got our launch angle and our spin rate. I think you talk to a lot of coaches, they tend to try and target a launch between 25 and 30 with a shot like this. And then from a spin loft standpoint, and we could get that on the previous slide, targeting maybe around 55 degrees of spin loft. So that spin loft for everybody is that difference between the angle of attack of the club and where the face is pointed.
Yep.
Right. So if I'm moving positive in the same direction the face is pointed, that's like not a lot of spin loft, not a very oblique impact. But typically you're moving down, the face is pointed up. So I like that angle between the direction the face is pointed and the direction it's traveling to be around 55. And that's gives you a good amount of spin, some forgiveness if you don't quite get ideal condition, maybe a little grass, a little moisture in there.
Well, this is a question. When do you measure spin loft? That's an impact, I imagine, right?
That's where it's most important,
Right?
Because that's what the ball's seeing,
right?
At the end of the day, right? Even though you weren't perfect, pretty good result. Which good design of
it's a great
soul,
wedge,
right?
Right?
Exactly. But that's what's most important is what the ball sees. But if you can manipulate, use that to your advantage of what the ball sees, great. But typically you want it to be pretty consistent, right? So if we have a tour player come in here, hit those 15-yarders, probably going to be hitting pretty close to the ball. He might not be clipping it every time. Probably a little bit of turf interaction, but consistently very close to the ball to minimize the turf interaction and get consistent outcomes.
Okay. I want to hit another shot, see if I can redeem myself, and let's keep talking about this. So we know what attack angle is now.
Yep.
We know what the ground does to the club. It pushes it back up.
Yep.
We know that when it does that, we're going to have this positive angle attack, which is going to hurt things, I imagine, like spin and distance control and things like that, right?
Yep.
When we do that, because the spin loft is going to be not good if we're going up at the ball.
Yeah, for just a shot where you're trying to control the trajectory and get good reaction on the green with spin.
Is my goal to show 0 ground interaction before the ball? Is that my goal?
I would say to minimize it, and over the course of a number of shots, ideally we'd like to see you hitting the same spot every time. And so I think one of the big differences we saw among skill levels is like I said, at the ground the angle of attacks are very consistent.
Yeah.
What ended up happening is the best players in the world, their angle of attacks were steeper at the ball than, say, the higher handicapper.
Yeah.
And way more repeatable.
Got it.
So the higher handicapper might be hitting 2 inches behind the ball on one, catching it really clean on the next. And so where they're hitting the ground, even though they're doing it at the same descent angle, was really variable. And that's what causes it to be more positive because it's kicking it up. Whereas the best players in the world are hitting it close and doing it in a very tight window.
All right, here we go. We're going to hit another shot. I'm going to target to hit this ball way better. Are you good, Zach?
Ready when you are.
Okay, here we go. There we go.
Crispy.
That's a little farther,
That's all right.
but we got We got contact on that one.
Definitely hear the difference. All right. Yeah, look at that. That's beautiful. Remember before we had this like really big ramp up?
Right.
You can see your angle of attack there. It's still negative when
Yeah.
you get to the ball, like below this bold line. And then you can see it kicks up. So you have both ball contact and the ground competing with each other because you clipped it really well, right?
Okay.
And so you ended up, rather than being driven down like we saw in that initial shot you hit, it's actually popping up, but that's more due to the fact that like ball pushed it into the ground and the ground's now reacting and pushing the club back up. So you get this little blip and then we follow along. So that's like world of difference between those two shots you just hit.
This is a graph you want to see. This is like what you're looking for.
I mean that looks more like the best players in the world for that type of shot,
right?
Than the first one you hit.
Yeah.
The higher handicapper, like between those two, that's the challenge. Is they probably have both of those.
Right.
Right. You might see this every once in a while.
Yeah.
But then you'll see the 2.5 incher behind, and so from our data, what seemed to separate them is less the descent angle when they hit the ground and more where are they hitting the ground, and can we tighten that up, and as we tighten it up, move it closer to the ball to get that more repeatable result, that sound that you heard when you clipped it. So
Zach, I'm curious on how far behind it I hit it on that one. What's that number?
0.83 inches behind the ball.
Oh man, it felt like I could have sworn I didn't hit, but there's nothing.
Yeah, and so there's a little bit of a delta in there, right? There's the radius of the ball, and what this is doing with that lead edge is it's using kind of that point where it touches the ground. So you can imagine that even though that lead edge is maybe inside the ball, like you're still going to get a little bit of ground contact because it's looking at this lead edge for that kind of ground contact, and the ball's kind of hitting up here. So that's really good. And you saw it in the data, right? And you felt it.
Yeah.
And that's an example of like, man, it felt like super crispy.
Right.
But you're still interacting with the ground, which is why bounce is important, why wedge design is important. What you're experiencing as a player and building your confidence is going to be really influenced by that soul design. Even if you're like, I'm a ball first guy, I never hit the ground. It's like, well, you actually do.
So my attacking, you're right, it stayed the same. 13 degrees, 0.7, just pretty much the same, right?
Yep.
Then impact, wow, crazy. Okay, so it barely changed at impact then.
Yep. So that's the big difference, right? So 13 down, you're a 13 down guy.
Yep.
Like when it comes to like when it hits the ground.
Yep.
But just shifting that 2 inches forward.
Yeah.
Totally changed what the ball saw, right? And you saw it in the flight.
Yeah.
Much more kind of didn't pop up on you. It was this low kind of spinny. I mean, look at the difference in kind of backspin and launch, right?
Because we just totally changed the spin loft calculation. By
Exactly.
Whatever that was, right? Went from 5 up to 12 down. So 17 degree difference.
Totally different math, and this is what I mean. If you talk to some of the best coaches in the world, those numbers are really good. Right?
Yeah.
Launch in 25 to 30. I mean, it's great spin. I mean, beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so now we know what we're looking for, right? So that's the goal. You've talked about the challenge of like what separates me from Viktor Hovland in here is my ability to repeat it.
Yep.
Let's see. So he's able to consistently do this. This is him right here, right?
Yeah. So I mean, he's he's somebody that over the last couple years, self-admittedly, he's like, man, I just struggle with wedges.
Yeah.
And then, comes in like a year ago fall, has a great fall, right?
Yep.
Great FedEx performance. He comes in here and we start measuring some wedges. This kind of kicked off this study. This is before we ran that big study. And so we watched him execute with his coach, kind of his newer technique. So this is a slow-mo video of him out just back here by the green, tracing out what his wedge was doing coming into impact. And the thing for Viktor that really resonated was his coach, O'Mayo, was like, let's try and steepen your angle of attack.
Yep.
Right? And so started steepening the angle of attack. All of a sudden, he's really repeatable. He's catching the ball. Outcomes are really consistent. And so measuring this, we were like, okay, in my head, just at first glance, I'm like, okay, you're getting steeper, right? The bad thing is maybe you get stuck in the ground. And so we start looking at this and we go, man, he's got this really rapid exit. So you can see it come into the ball, boom, and then all of a sudden he's getting that club out of the ground really quickly. And so the big question for us is how much of that was ground and how much of that is Viktor through maybe working with his coach, what technique, maybe he's raising the shoulder kind of right after impact. And so we ran this big study. We actually did some other studies where call it the Charlie Brown test, you know, or Lucy's like holding the football and then pulls it out on him. And so we had one of our elite players come in and we had him close his eyes and hit chips and put noise canceling headphones on. And then like I would take the ball out and he would just swing and just hit the ground. And then he'd hit a couple more chips. Then I pulled the turf out from underneath. So there's no contact at all.
Nice.
You know, some funny outtakes because one time I didn't move the ball and he totally shanked it. And he's like, was that me? Oh my gosh. And, but it helped us understand how much of that is player driven and how much of that is ground driven.
Okay.
And answer this question that we had with Viktor. And pairing that test up with the larger test we did, I could say with a lot of confidence that this is the ground helping Viktor get the club out. So he's steepened his angle of attack, leading for his movement pattern and what he's familiar with, led to way more consistent both point of first touch with the ground and the ball, as well as tightening up that kind of variability.
Right.
And he's got the right grind to interact with the ground at those entry points to ensure that he gets the ground's help getting the club out of the ground efficiently.
Interesting.
Right? Nobody likes that feeling if it gets stuck in the ground.
Right.
Right. And so we've been able to match up angle attack with good wedge design and wedge fitting, and be able to answer what are the factors that are kind of leading to, well, both good performance and then maybe, subpar performance.
What's your hunch on, like, what was an angle of attack on? Do you have a guess of what it probably was on a shot like this?
Yeah, so for Viktor, he's like 10 down.
Oh, okay. Got it. So it's not that steep.
Not super steep.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 to 12, so not totally dissimilar to what you were just executing in here. Now, we've measured some other players that are really shallow, right? 5 down, 4 down. On average, we saw probably 8 down across the range of handicap groups. So if you took like your kind of scratch golfers and your 10 handicaps and your 20 handicaps, they were all on it, like as a group. The average was like maybe down 8.
Okay.
And again, at the ball, the higher handicappers were like almost level because they're just hitting the ground more often further behind it. And shallows out the angled attack by the time it gets to the ball.
I saw a slide that you guys had that there is variability though, right? Like attack angle does change. So it's not like there is, from what you guys would say, there's not one way to do it. Great success with plenty of angle of attacks.
Yeah, and I think that's a healthy debate now among the coaching community. And I think what we've seen both, like players with steep angle of attacks be really proficient and really consistent, and those with shallower ones still being able to like make consistent contact with the ball. I think geometrically, you're like, well, if I'm steeper versus shallower, maybe player dependent on just their comfortable movement patterns. For shallower, maybe you get a little more grass in between the ball and the club before you get to the ball.
Yeah.
Maybe something to consider. I think there's still some unanswered questions, and I think different coaches have different approaches to it. And I think you can point to successes for kind of every method.
Yeah.
But I think we have evidence to kind of back a number of different approaches. Right.
Well, let's hit another shot. I want to see if I can repeat my success of our demonstration. And I want you to talk about, like, to me, it naturally leads to, we want to have an attack angle down. Contact is most important. So this kind of shifts my focus on chips of, like, let's focus on this one thing maybe and just like lock in on that. I've had this. I'm a steeper player. Is like, I don't like getting stuck in the ground. Maybe I've just had the wrong grinds in my bag. Could be kind of what you're communicating maybe, that it's not interacting right.
Definitely a variable to look at for sure.
Well, let's hit a shot, and then why don't you tell us about grinds. Zach, how are we doing?
Ready when you are.
Okay, I'm gonna hit this one.
This is 30 on the screen.
30 yards? Okay, let's go with that. Well, that was a good one. 31 carry. Okay. A lot of spin, so I'm going to guess that was just fine.
So we have a number of different grinds. So you're hitting an S159 wedge.
Or actually, before that, define bounce and grind. You want to talk?
Great question.
This is, we got to get this clear.
Yeah, grind is this. I don't know. I kind of call it a junk drawer term.
Yeah.
Bounce, right? Because there's a number of different factors that can influence bounce and the experience somebody has when they execute a shot with a wedge and they kind of evaluate the turf interaction.
Okay.
So some of the different factors that play into that are the angle of, so if you look at kind of the leading edge of a wedge, and does the sole kind of go straight across? Does it come up like this? So you'll talk about bounce angle, which is essentially kind of like, people will measure this angle here.
Okay.
So the bigger the bounce angle, the more that bottom of the wedge right after the lead edge kind of maybe goes up like this.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you can imagine, like, you can go up an angle and then like remove the material really quickly.
Yep.
And so even though you have a big angle, you might not have a lot of material down there.
Mm-hmm.
And all that material also interacts with the turf and creates resistance and reaction forces. And so in designing wedges, you're looking at the angle, you're looking at the width. So how from this point to kind of the low point on the wedge, how much material is there?
Mm-hmm.
So our TS wedges might, have a decent bounce angle, but then the width is actually pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
Even this kind of edge radius here can influence the junk drawer term effective bounce.
Okay.
Right? We could say effective bounce because there's different variables that are influencing that. And so, and not only measuring that here, but particularly for your higher lofted wedges, you're trying to execute different shots.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might have what's called relief. So you kind of maybe have a different geometry on the heel. You talk about heel relief. You take some material away.
Yep.
So when you open it up, it sits, that lead edge sits closer to the ground. And so, we have a number of different grind options in our S159 wedges. We're really excited to use this facility to do some more research, both to help find the right grind for the right player, as well as uncover different areas where maybe we have an opportunity to modify a grind and create better performance. And so we'd love to get, and we've done this before, is get just trays of turf in here, different types of turf. So we're hitting off of a spongy mat. It's going to have a certain type of reaction force, maybe a little more bouncy than you would see in softer conditions. So can we get some of the different types of turf in here, do larger tests, maybe with some different grinds, and see, okay, how do those influence performance? And so it's really exciting for us to have the technology and keep gaining insights to influence design.
So as a steeper player, gosh, I always feel like I should have more bounce, right? Is that like a common
That's the
phrase,
common belief, right? and I think even our own fitting material, like all things being equal, if we can't measure you, if you're kind of steeper, right? Maybe you need a little more reaction force to make sure you can get the club out of the ground. And so particularly for like when you're hitting full swings with a wedge, for sure. That's going to be the case. And where it gets, a little more nuanced with short game, and particularly whatever your highest lofted wedge is looking at the different shots. How are you delivering? Are you doing a pretty square face, a little open face, looking at the angle of attack? And so using a system like this, we could do a little bit more analysis on, okay, well, we could give you a wide sole, but actually you're opening it up, the lead edge is rising, maybe you are consistently impacting it a little further behind the ball. That might be detrimental, and all of a sudden you start bouncing the lead edge into the ball. And so maybe we actually want to go, if that's the case, even though you're steep, if you're hitting it behind the ball, maybe we want to go with a little less bounce to ensure we're not having that. And you've probably experienced, maybe in a firm bunker, you've experienced that, right? You hit down, you open it up, and it actually like bounces up into the ball rather than getting underneath it. And so that's why I like with firm bunkers, you go, well, let's do a little less bounce, because you don't want it bouncing up into the ball. So as with most fitting, it gets nuanced and kind of, that's why custom fitting's a big deal, right?
Well, let's look at this. How'd I do, Zach, how'd I do here on this one?
Looks like this one might have been your best one yet.
Oh yeah? Oh, that graph looks really smooth, huh?
How smooth that trace of our attack is right now we are right at impact.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for demoing on that first one. Clearly, you have really good low point control and where you enter the ground. So
On today, I do.
Yeah.
It also seems like the harder you hit it, the easier it is to control. Like if you made me do another 15-yarder, I think I might struggle again.
You know,
is that a thing or no?
It's funny in golf. There's this whole thing. It's called Fitt's Law,
Okay.
and what it is that like, and it's a study some guys did a long time ago where they're like, okay, push a button,
Okay.
right? And the idea is the faster you do something, the more chaotic it gets, and the less repeatable you can be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, really slow. Yeah, I can be really accurate in pushing the button. But now if I ask you to do it faster, you're going to get less consistent. And so, Sasha McKenzie up in Nova Scotia, right, doing some speed training. As somebody increases speed, is it, does Fitt's Law hold? Do they get less consistent as they increase their speed? If the argument is like, not necessarily, and you're kind of highlighting like, actually, if you go really slow with a wedge, you actually might be less repeatable.
Right.
And so I want to look into the data we have to see kind of, okay, as we go from 15 yards to 30 yards to 60 yards, is there this behavior where actually like people get more consistent as they speed up, which is kind of counter to like some of the other knowledge just across human behavior.
Right.
So it's fascinating that you kind of have that experience. A little bit of tangent there, but
for sure,
kind of an interesting tidbit in the academic community, relating golf to kind of other fields of study.
Yep. Let's see. How far behind did I hit that one?
None.
None?
So the heavy contact, we got one here, just a logical showing that there was not ground contact before the ball on that shot.
Interesting.
Nope, I lied.
You
It says none. But
well, we got a threshold of what's heavy contact, right?
Yeah. So 0.2 of an inch behind the ball is your answer.
Yeah, which is nothing.
Yeah.
And so really good. Angle of attack at the ground is 12 down.
Yeah. Impact.
That impact 11.59.
Yeah.
So very little change in your angle of attack between when you first touch with the ground and the ball. Very clippy. This is your 30-yarder, right? So a little more spin, a little lower launch.
Okay, so things I've learned today. Well, like for me, it's a whole mindset shift of just like, I don't know why you've never focused on this, but it seems really obvious, but like just focus on contact on these short shots. I think we all get carried away with visualizing the ball flight and where is it going to land and like this and that.
Yeah.
Maybe we should let's just try to hit it consistently in the same spot, maybe a little bit more. I think it's a really easy takeaway that people should do because we all kind of suck at it probably.
Yeah, I know. I can improve. Sounds like from your trip abandoned.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe you still got some improvement.
Any suggestions based on kind of what you've seen, or just like what kind of grind would I fit into? Does this help me at all, or is this like with that? Or
I mean, some questions I'd ask you is like, so you're abandoned last week.
Yeah.
Kind of that has a certain set of conditions associated with it. What are you normally playing? And so, in here, based on your angle of attack, and it's kind of start with just kind of meat and potatoes standard grind.
Yeah.
And then kind of go from there based on the conditions you're typically playing in. Probably ask you to hit some other shots, right? And see, we could go out there and kind of even take some measurements out there or in here of like, okay, well, let's try and get over something. How do you execute that shot? And that'll really influence what grind we would end up in.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, for me, the big thing is I think there's a number of things to look at of like just simple things like consistency of ball position. Like, am I put it in the same spot every time? What's my lateral movement look like? I mean, I'm not a coach, but it's like we've done enough studies where we've looked at just, amateurs to pros, and it's like just things like just consistency of setup. Right. And where your ball is, like the pros they know where they're putting it, and they're put in the same spot every time. You get, to folks like my dad, and it can, shot to shot, it's moving around, so no wonder there's some added variability in kind of your outcomes. Yeah. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Erik.
Fun stuff.
This is a super cool study. Learned a lot. I think we all got some things to work on after this. Thanks, man.
Love it. Yeah.
Appreciate it. The awkward handshake. How are we going to close this?
Yeah.
You like that? That was really good.